Ahoy, and welcome in to another mind expanding episode of Not Allowed to Die, your podcast about mental health, where I, Dan Megler, social worker and life enthusiast, answer your questions about mental health. Alongside me, as always, is Mariska, the three-toothed Patterdale Terrier, and you can hear her licking her paws in the background. And we all know that when Mariska is licking her paws, it means we could be doing a little bit of a better job in rating and reviewing the podcast. And I think Mariska has been particularly wanting to get more follows on YouTube. So again, for all these interview podcasts, remember those are also posted on YouTube. So you want to check them out there. Mariska was reminding me while we were on our walk, just before we get started with this, to bring attention to Pause for Patrick. So remember, if you know a young person who could benefit from having an emotional support animal, tell them to go to pauseforpatrick.org, where they'll be assigned a wish granter who can help them acquire an animal, and we can even give them funding to get some training for that animal. So pauseforpatrick.org. Now, Mariska was incredibly enthusiastic because today we have a guest, and you know how much Mariska loves guests. And our guest today, Colin Kingsmill, is the co-founder of Whole Human Coaching, a strategic advisor to health, healing, and transformational process for platform Kayla, and he's authoring Fearless, Crossing the Bridge from Fear to Bliss. So we are so excited to have a coach here. And Colin, just thank you so much for being on the podcast.
No, it's great to be here. Thank you so much.
So can you tell us a little bit about your story and how you came to this work of helping people transform their lives and not have fear kind of dominating the way they operate?
I guess that's a kind of a twofold question. Because I suppose for a long time, I was working around myself, right? My goals, my objectives, all the things that I wanted to achieve. And somewhere along the way, I realized that I had more fun helping others than trying to achieve my sort of financial or career objectives. And that's really how I got into coaching. I kind of shifted almost naturally from consulting and advisory into coaching, because during my consulting career, I found that a lot of people really needed to break down the narratives and the stories and the obstacles and the challenges that they had in their heads to kind of grasp an idea of who they were and what they were doing and what was the purpose and why were they doing it. So I just redirected my focus towards a different purpose.
Well, and I get the sense that in consulting, it was probably a lot about problem solving. And the sense that I get from you is your viewpoint now is more about an entire person in seeing people fully and then trying to say, we could solve this one problem for you, but that's not what you're about. So can you tell me a little bit more about that? Of like how, when you're interacting with someone, how do you start to bring in learning about all of them as opposed to just what we call in therapy more the medical model of just saying, okay, you've got this problem, I want to solve it. So can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's probably good to use an example of a couple of brothers that had a business that was actually going quite well. It was two brothers that had been in business for, I guess, about 7 years altogether. And they didn't really know what their marketing message was. They didn't know what their why was. And it actually took me 3 months to kind of tease it out of them. And that was really the experience that said to me, I need to understand how to unlock these ideas in people's minds, because so often I think we are looking at life through life and work, right? Through kind of a multitude of lenses that are kind of self-limiting, or a multitude of lenses of stories and narratives that we're telling ourselves about how we need to live and work. And those might come from a plethora of origin stories, but it's really interesting how people think that they can get to work and kind of shut off the rest, right? It's like, no, let's kind of magnify and look at the rest to make sure that you're thriving on the work side of things, right? So that's kind of why we created Whole Human Coaching, because we kind of want to look at people much more holistically than, like you say, that quick therapeutic narrative, or that quick therapeutic solution, or that doesn't look at the sort of the kaleidoscope of what's going on in people's lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people, especially men, want to think of themselves more as a file cabinet. And it's like, okay, you open this file, but this other file doesn't touch the other one. And really, people are more like an aquarium where it's like, okay, if you add one thing in, all the other factors are really more influenced by it than we want to allow. So,
Oh, that's such a great analogy, like the filing cabinet. Yes. 100%. I totally agree with you. And I see it kind of as a kaleidoscope of colors and things that are shifting all the time. But an aquarium is a great analogy. And especially guys
mhm.
who have all of these pressures on them today in modern society and modern culture, all these expectations that are not necessarily well-founded, but they put a lot of pressure on people, and they're not very useful. So I think it's a good idea to move away from the filing cabinet to the aquarium, right? Because I think life has also gotten much more complex today
Mhm.
than, say, 20 years ago, right? Or when when smartphones kind of came onto the market in 2006, 2007.
One of my clients, well, friends, really, she had a background as a therapist, but she's moved into corporate coaching, particularly for like hedge fund managers. And one of the
Mm-hmm.
things that she's found, she said, many of these guys are much more damaged than the people I was seeing in the clinic for trauma stuff and things like that. But she has difficulty getting people to, some of them that are highly successful to open up to listening and hearing. So when you
Mm.
go into working with high level people who are highly successful in some areas of their life, how do
Yep.
you start to get them to be vulnerable and to be open to looking at more than just, no, I want to focus on this area? How do you get them to start to say, yes, I need to take that panoramic view of my entire life?
I kind of don't let them get away with the silos.
Hmm.
So you'll have somebody that might want to talk specifically about their job and their work and their career and the team and all that stuff. But I, um, I think a good coach will intuitively understand that there's a lot more going on, right? And that's why I think with whole human coaching, we kind of want to burst out of the boundaries of the traditional coaching models, which kind of keep you on a kind of a strict um, guideline, if you want. Um, I personally just don't let people get away with their own bullshit. It's like I've told myself those stories many, many times over the years. So I'm not going to let you continue that, right? I know that if you tell yourself certain stories over a long period of time, and you don't want to access certain parts of you, right, behind the mask, right, especially for men, um, that it's damaging in the long run. It's a waste of time. So I just don't let people sit in that space of denying the holistic nature of who we are.
Now, how do you determine? Because one of the things we've talked about is that traditional coaching, as I say, that very structured, regimented saying, okay, this
Yep.
isn't therapy, but sometimes with, I don't think you can help a person unless you can really allow them to share all that they need to share.
Oh
But then,
yeah.
but then how do you decide, okay, this is getting a little too much into the therapeutic realm where this is not my thing as much. So when you're
Yep.
working with someone, I'm assuming you let them go wherever the conversation takes you. But so like, how do you have any guidelines in your mind of when you say, this might be delving into like, you need something different than what I'm offering?
Yeah, and look, it's it's kind of intuitive, and it's a gut feeling.
Hmm.
And certainly when most of the conversation is leaning back in time and looking through the rearview mirror,
Hmm.
then I'll quickly refer them to somebody,
Hmm.
right? Because if you need to look back and you need to deconstruct a whole lot from the past, or at least understand it, right? I can help you deconstruct the stories in your head, but if you
Hmm.
need to go farther back and really work on some childhood trauma or whatever it is, then you need to speak to another professional. And that's why uh, I think it's so important for individuals to be open to having kind of an orchestra
Hmm.
of people that might help them, right? I don't think in today's modern complex society that there is a one stop, one shoe, or one size fits all solution to what might be going on in your mind, right? So get a little bit of therapy, get a little bit of coaching, try a little bit of this or try a little bit of that, whether it's rapid RTT, rapid transformational therapy, or hypnosis, or whatever. Life is really complicated.
Hmm.
And we can get to moments of despair or real challenge quite easily,
Hmm.
right? So reach out.
Well, and I think, that's I totally agree with you. This idea of if you do have one person who's wanting you to get all of your advice from them, that's dangerous. We should always be seeking out multiple people, and no
Yep.
therapist, no other person should ever be jealously guarding and saying, no, you don't want to listen to anybody else. If they're doing that, that's a problem. Um,
Yeah, that's a bad coach or a bad therapist or a bad practitioner, I think,
mhm,
right? Because at least for me anyway, I like my policies kind of catch and release,
mhm,
right? Like, let's get you to where you need to get to as quickly as possible. And if that process doesn't include me all of the time, great. Let's bring in a doctor, bring in a nutritionist, bring in somebody about addiction, bring in somebody about childhood trauma or trauma and loss. There's lots of there's the nice thing, I guess, about the internet today and social media is there's lots of channels that you can get your information from,
mhm.
and that you can get help from. So nobody has to be alone in the complexity of our modern world and manhood um, and depression and anxiety, right?
Mhm.
It's nobody deserves to be alone on that trajectory.
And when we think about it from a physical standpoint, whether you're working with a physical therapist or whether you're working with a personal trainer,
Mhm.
hopefully, you're going in with some goals and that person's teaching you how to either stretch better or get stronger, but hopefully you're not dependent upon that person to work out every time. And hope, just like with us, hopefully we're teaching people how to do a lot of that work on their own. Are there
Mhm.
certain themes that you feel like with your clients you're trying to get across to them? And like, how do you know when they're ready for that release point of, so okay, I've worked with this person and like I've worked with it, we've developed the initial goals. And throughout
Mhm.
our conversations, maybe our goals have evolved a little bit. But then,
Mhm.
like, what do you find that there's any themes that you're seeing pretty regularly in the kind of things that people need to take to be able to do it on their own without needing that consistent feedback?
That's a good question. The one big theme that I see over and over again is this idea of unworthiness.
Hmm.
Um, that you are not worthy enough of where you are or what you're doing, or wherever you are today, you are not worthy.
Hmm.
And I think that is a symptom of a culture that is kind of distanced itself from humanity.
Hmm.
Um, so that's really that for me, that's what I see over and over. And maybe I'm attracting that, but I see that over and over again, that people get into these situations of anxiety or depression or despair, or they're stuck,
Hmm.
um, because they feel that they haven't met some kind of expectation.
Hmm.
So a lot of my work is, well, where's the origin story of that expectation, right? Where did that come from?
Hmm.
And how can we kind of look back at what happened there to release you today from that expectation? So
So you,
that's really, so I mean, it comes in many names, right? Like imposter syndrome, or um but it's I'm not enough
mhm.
is the I think is I think the main issue.
Have there been any, like, are there any tools that have been particularly successful for you in helping people let go of that unworthiness? Is it like figuring out that, okay, the story that you were telling yourself was you are unworthy because of this. Now let's
Mhm.
replace that story with a new one, or like how are you helping people? Like what's
Yeah.
been working and getting people? Because I'll take any tips I can get because that's such a big problem, obviously, in the therapy world too. So any tips that have or tricks that are working for, or techniques, I should say, that are working for you and helping people to let go of that sense of unworthiness?
Yeah. So for me, it's about mindfulness, right?
Hmm.
So learning how to meditate,
Hmm.
be mindful in that meditation, really understanding your purpose. Okay. Understanding your purpose and being as authentic as possible.
Hmm.
Right. So purpose for me is also different than passion, because I think
Hmm.
a lot of us got brought up going, oh, follow your passion, follow your passion, follow your passion. Well, if my passion is building, like, painting model boats, I'm
Hmm.
not going to have like a productive, resourceful career, right? So I think it's about following your purpose and living in integrity.
Hmm.
And there's that great book by Martha Beck that came out recently called The Way of Integrity.
Okay.
And I think so much of the challenges today come from not living in that space of integrity for yourself,
Hmm.
right? Not being able to say, no, or when you've said, like, being able to say no when you don't want, when you want to say yes, and setting boundaries and living in integrity and being who you really are. Um, a lot of the world wasn't brought up that way.
Hmm.
So I think a lot of mental dis-ease comes from when you are off that center of who you really are and having a purpose-driven life and a meaningful existence, right? Um, but we're not taught that, right? So much of existence today and living in life is about external validation,
Hmm.
right? Oh, if I get this car, or if I have that house, or if I look or dress this way, then I'm validated and I'm worthy and I'm successful, right? So it's really about going back and discovering, who you are, what's your purpose, what's the impact that you want to make, and it doesn't have to be like I want to be a Nobel Peace Prize winner. It could
Hmm.
be, being parents, being
Hmm.
good parents. It doesn't matter. It can be from simple to complex. So, but that sense of meaning and purpose and executing that in integrity is, I think, for me, the biggest disconnect that we're dealing with today.
Well, I would agree. I was talking to my wife just this morning, and she works in corporate America, and that
Okay.
idea of always looking toward that next quarterly earnings report for that, as you're talking about that external validation,
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
it's a matter of the more that she dives into her purpose as a mother and as like other things are mentoring young women and things like that, then her stress levels go down. But when
Right.
she's fixated on, okay, is the CEO going to like my presentation and these other things like that, which that's an endless treadmill. So I love what
Yeah.
you're saying about trying to help, and but is that a hard thing for especially a lot of these people in corporate America to get them to connect themselves to something outside? Because so many, I know for my wife, identifying herself based on her job and her job success has been, such a big part of developing who she is for, for 40 years now, so how do you help them to say, okay, well, what about this other thing, whether it's my gardening or my kids, like how can I make that a
Right.
bigger part of my identity?
I think it goes back to a sense of self-worth again,
Hmm.
right? Where do you derive your sense of worthiness?
Hmm.
Okay. And we've been brought up, and we're not that many years apart, but we've been brought up to connect our sense of self and our sense of self-worth and our sense and our worthiness to a job, a career, quarterly earnings. So I
Hmm.
think what's happened is we've over the last sort of 50 years, maybe we've allowed kind of the corporate world
Hmm.
to validate who we are.
Hmm.
Okay. And that has resulted in huge numbers in mental illness across the US and across, Western Europe and Canada, right? So So I think that's where the problem is. We identify or we categorize our sense of worth with an external object and external validation. So I think that's the big problem. So that's why I keep saying, let's rediscover your humanity, right? So like with your wife, right? Like mentoring or volunteering or doing all of those other things, that stuff needs to be amped up, right? But it's not a super easy process though, because when for so many years you have said house, car, career, progression. I hear a lot of people about their trajectory, so what I do a lot of work with people is, let's define your blueprint or your leadership style or the identity of who you are based around not a corporation or the job that you might be in today or tomorrow, but around you, right? What's your goal? What's the destination? How do you want to make an impact? That might be one element. The other element might be, what are your values, right? The other element might be, what are the elements of your personal brand? So instead of allowing the corporation or the business to validate you, let's find the tools to validate you around who you really are, right? And your personal brand and how that can transfer from one organization to the other. And I'm not saying, corporate earnings are a bad thing, but disconnect who you are from that number is my message, right? It's break that mold, that external validation is who you are, right? Because corporate earnings are corporate earnings, and there might be 1,000 derivatives or inputs that are affecting that have nothing to do with you and who you really are. So I guess my work is, let's discover who you really are, right outside of the organization.
Yeah, and that's what I like about when you're talking about that whole person coaching. Because if you were just coaching the person to a specific goal, well, you might help that person get that promotion, do that other thing, but that's not going to, then if you're not looking at the why and you're not like tying that back to, then are we ultimately going to have that satisfaction? So I wanted to ask you a little bit about your writing, and just what are, so in this book, just you're crossing the bridge from fear to bliss. What are some of the messages that you're going to be getting across in your writing?
Yeah, so I suppose I suppose the reason for writing it is, I don't think people need to take as long as I did to do the work, right? So it's like kind of like a workshop guidebook, quicker than I did it. And the whole idea of Fearless is to get you to dismantle the fear that you've got going on inside of you in relation to what you're doing professionally or personally or all together, right? So I've said I looked at the first part of my career, I looked at the second part of my career, and I said, okay, what have I learned along the way, right? Because I've said yes to multiple opportunities around the world. Some of them have turned out great. Some of them have been total disasters, right? But they all brought me to where I am today. So I came up with like an 8-point plan and the first part is create a barrier of protection around you. And the first thing to do is to turn off the news, turn off toxicity that is coming your way, whether it's relationships or friends or family or whatever. Really kind of create a kryptonite protection around yourself. The second step is really to listen to yourself. So often the body is telling you a story, right? The body is saying yes or no, or I'm stressed, or there's something wrong here. And we don't listen in modern culture, right? We go to the pharmacy, right? Or we go to the doctor and we get a prescription for something that again, like you said, if you're following a traditional coaching model, you might not see the whole picture. And I think pharmaceutical medicine does the same, right? You go to the doctor, they give you some pills, and all right, but they don't ask you about your nutrition, your sleeping, your lifestyle, et cetera, et cetera. So listen to yourself. And there's this great book by Gabor Mate. It's a few years old now. It's 20, I guess, but the book was called When the Body Says No.
Okay.
And he's come up with written an incredible follow-up to that book that just came out last year called The Myth of Normal, about our toxic society and trauma in today's world, and how we've become it's become normalized that we're not okay. So really, step one is stop absorbing kryptonite, stop the news, right? Step two is listen to your body, right? Step three is design. I guess I kind of equate it to art, but you can equate it to, there's lots of metaphors, right? I like designing a picture of the new you, right? The picture of the new me. What does that vision look like? And you can use the painting metaphor, or you can use the nautical navigational metaphor. Like, where is the destination of you, right? Because so often in modern society, we get tussled around by social media, by the news, by colleagues, by careers, by money, by incentives, et cetera, et cetera. So my thing is, no, let's focus. What is your destination going to be? And it doesn't matter if it's here or over there, left, right, up, down, center, doesn't matter. But decide, where are you going to take your vessel? Where are you going to take this human, right? That it's a mathematical miracle that we're here on this little rock, right? So where are you going to take it? What are you going to do with it? And then what I really try and do is ask people to break that down. Like what are the goals? And Mel Robbins did a beautiful goal setting podcast. It's been a few weeks ago now, but specifically on the latest science and research around goal setting. So take the big picture, and you can use a vision board or journaling, or however you want to articulate it. But take the vision, break it down, right? And if you break it down into achievable goals, because I mean, you could put a Ferrari up on the wall, right, and go, oh, that's my, and if I watch The Secret 25 times, it's going to happen. No, that's not how it works. Actually, you need to take whatever that objective is and break it down into smaller pieces, so it's bite-sized and you can actually achieve things and feel good about that. Now, once you've done that, I think you need to set a series of kind of daily rituals, right? And those might be affirmations, they might be meditation, they might be yoga, they might be whatever it is, but make sure that in your visual sort of panorama, you've got reminders, and you create daily rituals. And those could be, sports or whatever you want, but create them. Then forget about what people are talking about. Forget about what people are thinking about you, right? And that goes back to this idea of integrity and authenticity. Forget it. Stop being a people pleaser. Being nice doesn't help you in the long run. Be who you really are. And then the last point, if you want, is and I get teased for this, but forget what you've learned, right? And that to me is all about forget. It's not really forget about what you learned in high school or university or whatever, but forget the conditioning that is no longer serving you. And that goes back to this idea of unworthiness, right? The unworthiness is conditioning that came from a specific point in time. So forget about it, right? And you might need some therapy, or you might need some other kind of work to do that, but let's work on forgetting about that conditioning, because it's not serving you today. And if some of it is, hell yeah, keep it there. But forget about what you learned is kind of my last step in that process of recreating the new you.
Well, again, because these, especially for people who've come through life traumas, we all learn lessons from the things we've gone through, but we might, to your point, we might not be learning lessons that serve us. We might be learning lessons that help us survive, but maybe that don't help us to thrive. You know,
Yes.
yesterday I was talking to your message of unworthiness comes home so much because I have this client and he um, he was in the foster care system, endured sexual abuse in multiple things and things like that. And he has a very
Yep.
entrepreneurial spirit, but he keeps every time he wants to start a business or gets an idea and anybody says a discouraging word about it, he just shuts down and crumples in
Right.
because there's this part of him that carries this feeling that I am
Yep.
unworthy, and
Yes.
I'm never going to be able to have that success is for some other people, and he
Right.
wants the trappings, he wants a BMW, he wants these nice cars and things like that,
True.
as if that will give him that validation, and it doesn't work that way. No matter what suit you put on, no matter what car you drive, you're not, until you feel that worthiness internally, you're going to keep sabotage, and that's his pattern. He keeps sabotaging himself and letting these things get in his way. And now I'm guessing for me as a therapist, I feel like part of my role is to then hold him accountable. Okay, you said you were going to do some research on other businesses that are like the one you want to start. Did you do
Right.
that? And is that for
Right.
you as a coach? Is that a lot of what you're providing for people? Is that accountability of saying like, hey, you said this was the goal, and are you achieving that goal, or how does that process work?
Yes, accountability, but also why, right?
Mm-hmm.
So often when somebody needs that sort of affirmation from a car or
Mm-hmm.
from a suit or some of those things that you were just describing, my question is, well, why do you really need that?
Mm-hmm.
What is that addressing,
Mm-hmm.
right? So I often in those types of conversations, I also go into what is the destination that you want to get to,
Mm-hmm.
right? Um, so some people might say, well, I want to be successful and have money. So I kind of work and say, well, why don't you think of money and success as a byproduct as opposed to the destination?
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting when you say, what if that BMW or what if that great suit or whatever else your client might be looking for, what if that was a consequence of, a
Mm-hmm.
byproduct of something else? What if it was just a derivative, right? That came with you doing something. So that's my kind of pivot that I do with people because I've been there myself, right? I've been the person wanting the Range Rover and the Audi and the this and the that and travel and you know Sen Moritz and all this stuff, right? I've done it. It would have been great if somebody really early on had said, "Well, why do you think you need that?" Right?
Mm-hmm.
And what if that was a byproduct of you doing something that you were, you know, purpose driven to do? It's really interesting because then their energy changes, their
Mm-hmm.
direction changes, their focus changes, and all of a sudden people get what they want by not focusing on it.
Mm-hmm. When I think for those people who are, you know, they're still so caught up in that unworthiness and this idea of, well, I want to be a good father, I want to be a good husband, but honestly, I probably don't even deserve my wife. Honestly, I don't. It's like, well, is that actually
Yep.
serving you to believe that? And what is that do? What is clinging to these negative thought patterns? How is that benefiting anyone? So, yeah.
Well, look, those negative thought patterns are a lot like eating a box of chocolates, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's pretty delicious, pretty easy. You can sit there for a long time, a lifetime, right? Eating the box of bonbons that aren't serving you,
Mm-hmm.
right? But they can. But that sort of. I had somebody the other day that we spoke a lot about how it was safe to stay in that repetitive
Mm-hmm.
circle, right? Um, because they knew the answer.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So my sort of push is, well, let's not worry about the answer.
Mm-hmm.
Let's kind of get you out of that hamster wheel
Mm-hmm.
and help you become a little more unlimited, unleashed, let go of those constraints and beliefs and stories. And my God, That's why I talked about kryptonite earlier, right? We are not living in simple times.
Mm-hmm.
Even from an evolutionary biology perspective, we weren't prepared for all of this,
Mm-hmm.
change and social media and the internet and information and hyper connected and hyper disconnected and all those things. And the mental health statistics in are testimony to that, right?
Mm-hmm. And 100%. And I find that for so many people, it's this issue of they've clung to it, as you talked about. Like you want people to take less time in letting go of these things. But if they've clung to this narrative, like they somewhere in their childhood, they decided, well, the universe hates me and it likes kicking my ass.
Yep.
And then all the other evidence, every time something bad happens, they've got more evidence to believe that. And then
Yep.
they've clung to this belief for so long that now the idea that, oh, I can let that go. Well, there's almost a grief and a loss in letting
Oh
go
yeah.
of how many wasted years there were in believing this thing. So how do you help people through that idea of like, wait, I didn't have to spend the last 25 years hating my body, hating myself, hating these other things. Is there any tips that you do to help people to like let go of that aspect?
Oh boy, a lot of that for me is a recognition of self-love.
Mm-hmm.
Right? A recognition of going back into the past, finding out where the origin stories are. Where did they start? Right? Where did you start telling yourself this stuff? And
Mm-hmm.
forgiving that person,
Mm-hmm.
forgiving that child or that young adult for just coping,
Mm-hmm.
because we're not taught how to deal with all of this.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it's about forgiveness first and foremost, and to begin to love that young person again so that you can love the adult of today.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably what I would do. I don't want to sound generic, but that to me it's about going to the origin of it all and forgiving and caring for and embracing and loving that little inner child that
Mm-hmm.
for so often many of us kind of abused or disregarded or kept believing, oh yeah, that's right. Yeah. Remember, that's how I got here. So I'm going to keep, no.
Are there any misconceptions about coaching that you find yourself having to, whether you're talking to, people at a dinner party or when people are coming to their first session, that you're like, any misconceptions that you run into a lot where people think, oh, coaching is going to be like this. And you're so to say, actually not so much.
The one that I run into a lot is, what is it?
Mm-hmm.
And I guess that's not so much a misconception, but just a complete sort of lack of understanding what it is. And I find that really interesting. And maybe it's because of the algorithms and the sort of the echo chambers that you or I might work in. I'm surprised a lot that a lot more people don't know about it. I think the other misconception is that it's not airy fairy, but kind of superfluous, right?
Mm-hmm.
That, but I think that's because of the low barrier to entry, right? A lot of people come into it saying, I want to be a life coach, or I want to be a performance coach, or there's so many other descriptors now, without the depth of knowledge or experience that I think people should have. So I think it gets a bit of a bad rap because anybody can kind of say, oh, I'm a life coach, and put up a Squarespace website really quickly and then be coaching people. But yeah, those are probably the two misconceptions. What is it? And, oh, it's not worthy. It's not useful. And I think coaching combined with other healing modalities can be really, really transformative, but it might not be the only solution that people should follow or have. Probably shouldn't be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if people think of it as like restaurants, where, there's a million different restaurants, some are good, some are not so good. Some are going to be great for one person and not for another person. And you
Yeah,
have to, get the right fit for the person. And does anybody need to eat at a restaurant? No, they don't necessarily need to eat at a restaurant. There's other ways to
yeah,
get fed, but they
yeah.
may have a more transformative experience at a restaurant than they would, eating on their own. Is the so
That's a really good analogy, actually. Yeah, great. I might use that one. It's a good one. But yeah, like before you go for dinner, do your research.
mhm,
Um, uh, if I think if you have a coach that you don't resonate with and that doesn't, understand your complexity, it could be more, it could be mm, more time spent than you need to spend. So yeah, that I love the restaurant analogy. Know where you're going, know what you're going to eat, know what they do, know what their specialty is.
mhm,
Get the best plate that's for you.
yeah.
Yeah, great
Yeah. If you
analogy.
if you don't like spicy, don't get Indian, or like that sort of thing. So
Exactly. Exactly.
now, how about for people thinking about becoming coaches? What should be anything that you would say for a person that, hey, you might not be a great fit, even though you might have a ton of expertise in the world and experience, you might not be a great fit for becoming a coach if you don't have X, personality traits, or you really should think about going into coaching if you're finding, like if you are the person who's always doing the mentoring, or so any tips for people who are listening of like, hey, maybe I should think about coaching, or oh, maybe I shouldn't.
Yeah. Oh, that's a good question. I think it ultimately resides in what do you want? What is your destination? What is
Mhm,
your personal destination? Why do you think you're here on this planet? What's your yeah, where do you what's the impact that you want to have,
mhm,
right? And why?
mhm.
So I think you'd really want to analyze, you know, do you want to just uh, do you want to just be a good conversationalist? Then maybe you should just be a good conversationalist and a good friend.
Mhm.
You know, so I'm not sure I'm answering your question really well, but dive into the why,
Yeah.
you know.
Well, and I think particularly as you talked about earlier, if you're thinking about who do you want to help? What is the expertise that you can give? One of my clients who's a young person, but they are a trans individual who has had a lot of expertise with makeup and finding gender non-binary clothing. And I
Mhm.
said, like, even though you're a young person, you might be able to coach and help some people in shopping. If you find that niche in that area where you are good at it, but you're not doing this to be the sage who gives out advice. If you're going
Right.
into it with that idea, then maybe
Yeah.
this, like you're not. If you're going into it, whether it's therapy, coaching, whatever, because you want to be adored and liked and listened to, maybe you need to be a cult leader, not not a coach.
Right, exactly. That's exactly what I was trying to say. So it's like it's like with human coaching, we've come to kind of a very thin slice of who we think our audience is, who we
Hmm.
think our market is. With my individual private coaching, it's a different one, right?
Hmm.
There I'm like I work with CEOs or entrepreneurs or founders on bringing out their excellence, bringing out their best. With whole human coaching, we work much more with teams and leadership and how the organic, how do you create sort of cultural cohesion within an organization. So if you do decide to get into the coaching business, understand or find your niche,
Hmm.
exactly like you just said. If it's non-binary clothing advice, well then maybe you need a TikTok channel
Hmm.
on that. So I think it's just not a, what's the word, um it's a very fragmented, rich kaleidoscope
Hmm.
of opportunities, and don't think that you should be one size fits all, because I don't think one size fits all works today.
Well, I think that's what I hope anybody who's listening to this, who's ever thought about getting coaching, if you were if you wanted to improve your golf game, you would feel no embarrassment about going to a golf coach to improve your swing. So if there's an aspect of your life that's not achieving where you want it to be, where you feel like you're leaving something, the most valuable commodity is time. And if you're going to be in this world, let's not waste any time. Let's go after the help, the support, the things that we need, and find the people who can help us achieve this, because no one's going to give you any time back because you spent an extra 10
Mm.
years being unhappy. So, if you're saying, if you're feeling unsatisfied, then researching, finding that person that can help you. Don't be ashamed or embarrassed to tell your neighbor, to tell your romantic partner, yeah, I'm looking for someone to help me do this. Because if they're not supportive of you being the best version of yourself, that might not be a person who you need to keep in your life long term.
Oh yeah, boy. I mean, and especially if you think about that book I mentioned, Martha Beck's The Way of Integrity,
Hmm.
she lost everybody. She lost her friends, she lost her family, she lost her career, she lost everything. She was a Harvard professor. But now she's an incredible, thriving coach with a new partner and a new life and a new tribe, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, don't waste a day. That's all. You don't know where your next breath is coming from.
Hmm.
Right. So do you want to spend another day in dissatisfaction or unhappiness or um, or a story that's not serving you or the planet or your community or your neighbors? Um, yeah, snap out of it as soon as possible. It's like,
Well, so if you're listening to this podcast, you're probably someone who's interested in mental health. And I guess the rule of thumb I would give you is this: if you are dealing with symptom impairment and there's a symptom that you need to remedied, talk to a therapist. But if your life is pretty solid, pretty good, but you want to take your life from good to great, consider investigating coaching.
yep.
And finding someone who might be able to help you then. Any other messages that you'd like to give to my audience today about coaching, about anything, about how to find you and the work that you're doing? Or
Look, you can find me at colinkingsmill.com. That's easy. I think the one thing, or maybe two things that I would leave your listeners with is, it doesn't have to be like this. Right? Your life does not have to be like it is today. It can improve greatly. Find your tribe, find your community. You're not alone. Don't do this by yourself and get into any space of or place of despair. And yeah, I forgot what the second one was, but find your community. Don't be alone, and you can thrive. I think we all have that birthright.
well, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing a little bit about, this model, which is not just the traditional just coaching model of just problem solution type thing. Is I really think
Yeah.
there's so much space for what you're doing in this world. For anyone who's listening, if you have a question for me or for Mariska, remember to email us at dmaiglerlcsw@gmail.com. And until we talk again, do whatever it takes to get you through this world. And remember, you are not allowed to die.